Last week we had a kind of a fun, curious, fun isn't the right word, it was a deep discussion about scars in our life. In fact, Pastor Bill started out by pointing out some actual physical scars on his body and then recounted a scar story or two about them. And the funny part that I was thinking of was after the service is Bill's scar inventory, I think, provoked many of us to do a mental inventory of the scars on our bodies too. And I heard some pretty good scar stories after the service. There was football and motorcycles and kitchen knives or pocket knives, and then we got into knee replacements and cancer surgeries and stuff like that. There, where we all have some scars. And I bet you this morning, there's even some COVID scars out there. What do you think? There's some COVID scars, maybe even some COVID fresh wounds. We talked about that some of the scars have not been healed yet. And the whole point of talking about that was that Jesus showed the disciples the places on his body where the nails had pierced and now where the scars had formed. And so that the disciples would know absolutely for sure, positively, that he had gone to the cross. And this was the risen Jesus. This was the real guy. And Jesus wanted to know that he's alive, and he wants to continue to heal the wounds in our lives, some of which, as I said, are still open wounds right now. And one day, we want there to be a scar story behind that, don't we? We want there to be a healing story behind each one. I know many people, though, maybe even some of us today, who might be persuaded that we have messed up so badly in our lives that God is just perpetually disappointed with us, that he can never do anything. We've just gone way too far. There's no healing for us. And so today we're reading a true scar story from the New Testament. It's not a physical scar, but please know that it is a real scar that this man is dealing with. This man was a very close friend and an outspoken follower of Jesus. But as we know, as we read, he turned his back on Jesus at Jesus' neediest hour. He is Peter. And after this time when he failed so miserably, I'm sure he wondered, can my life ever be rebuilt? Would that open wound in my body, in my life, ever heal? Could Jesus ever forgive him? Could he ever forgive himself? Peter's story can be tough for us to hear because on the one hand, it definitely emphasizes the uplifting power, the more radical greatness of God. It's God's countercultural pattern to choose the weak in the world over the people that think they're self-sufficient. And Peter, as it turned out, was one of the weak ones. And God heals through our weakness, not despite it. This is Peter in Jesus' story, but I think it's our story too. It's your story and it's my story. Jesus in you and Jesus in me. So let's read the first 14 verses of John chapter 21, and please follow along on the screen. It says, later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there: Simon Peter, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples. Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." Now, just a break, that might be some of your favorite verse in the Bible. I'm going fishing. That's the... So, okay, back to the story. We'll come too, they all said. And so they went out to the boat, but they caught nothing all night. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, "Fellows, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. And then he said, "Well, throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get some." So they did. and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, and jumped into the water and headed to the shore. The others stayed in the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were only about 200 yards from shore. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire, and some bread. "Bring some of the fish you've just caught," Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore. There were 150 large fish, and yet the net had not torn. "Now, come and have some breakfast," Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. This was the third time Jesus had appeared to his disciples since he'd been raised from the dead. There's more, but we're going to stop here right now. Just let's contemplate kind of the setting of what's taken place so far. It's early in the morning, and Peter and some of the disciples had been out fishing all night with nothing to show. That's not a good feeling for anybody who likes to fish. And in the shadows of the morning, they see a figure that's there, and they don't recognize him. The unidentified man shouts to them, "Hey guys, haven't caught anything, have you?" That's a kind of a stinging comment, isn't it? But and their short response was no, like that. And Jesus tells them then to let down their net on the other side. And the amazing thing is that they do it. They do it. And as I was reading through it this time, it really caught my attention that John wanted us to know that it was a bountiful catch, and maybe the net was only guaranteed for 100 fish, but they caught 153, and it didn't rip. And it was an amazing catch, filled to the point where the boat began to sink. That's a lot of fish, isn't it? That's a lot of fish. And then they realize it's Jesus' voice, and they're filled with excitement, especially Peter. And this brings certainly back some memories that Peter had so many amazing times with Jesus. Just think about it. Once early when he first met Jesus, Jesus said, "Peter," they were along the Sea of Galilee, he says, "I want to use your boat. Would it be possible for us to row out a little bit so I can be out a little ways from the shore, and so I can teach from that boat?" And on this occasion, Peter had also been shut out the night before in fishing, and once again, this experienced fisherman listens to Jesus, and he puts out his net again after the time of teaching, and the same thing happened. The nets were filled to overflowing, and so the boat is sinking again. On that occasion, Peter is so overwhelmed by Jesus that with this miracle, and he looks at him and he just doesn't know what to make of him, and he's filled with all sorts of awe and amazement and even some fear that he literally falls on his knees and he pleads with Jesus. He says, "Jesus, go away. I am so sinful. I am so sinful. I could never associate with you because you're so amazing." And Jesus says, "I know exactly who you are, Peter. I know exactly who you are. I know you're not perfect, but I have plans for you, my friend. And you will keep on fishing, but soon you will be fishing in a different way. You'll be fishing for the hearts of people. That's going to be your new calling." Jesus says, "I'm going to give you a huge gift, a way to invest your life that matters even more than what you're doing today." Another time, we remember that Peter might have recalled when he jumped out of the boat. And for a few seconds, when he kept his eyes on Jesus, he was walking on the water. Wow, what an experience that must have been. But then he began to sink as he took his eyes off of Jesus. But once again, Jesus gave him another chance, didn't he? He gave him another chance. So in our reading today, all these memories, I'm sure, are like memories do, are sort of nanoseconds within our minds, and they stir the emotions, they stir our hearts to what he was feeling. And Jesus, they get to shore, and Peter sees that Jesus had already fixed breakfast for him on a charcoal fire. On a charcoal fire. Charcoal, John is very deliberate in his reference to a charcoal fire, says that was the time when Jesus could have used Peter's friendship the most. Remember, as Jesus was being taken to trial, Peter was warming himself in the courtyard by a charcoal fire. And different people accuse him 3 different times of being one of Jesus' followers, and Peter denies even knowing him. No, I don't know him. No, I'm not one of his followers. And he even cursed once and said, he means nothing to me. He means nothing to me. And now here he is again, once again by that charcoal fire. So breakfast is over, and John tells us that it appears that it's just Peter and Jesus standing by that fire. What would Jesus say? Well, we read on and we find out that Jesus asks Peter a question. It was a question that at first it would feel like salt in an open wound. It would sting. It would sting, but it would eventually heal him. It would be a question that would be his healing. It was a very simple one. In verse 15 we read, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than these? Now, note a couple things. Jesus doesn't call him Peter here. He calls him Simon. And he goes back to the days before Jesus changed his name from Simon to Peter, which means rock. And somehow a rock which is strong and dependable doesn't seem quite as obvious right now. It didn't really fit the situation. And notice also what Jesus doesn't say. What he doesn't say. Simon, are you sorry? Simon, do you promise never to do this again? Simon, will you really try harder next time? He doesn't say that. But what Jesus did ask was most important. Do you love me? Do you love me? That word Jesus used for love would make the question sound something like this in our English languages if we sort of expanded it out. Simon, do you love me 100% without reservation? Some of you know the word agape. That's the word that Jesus is using there. 100% without reservation. And now Jesus is waiting for Peter's response. In a way, Jesus is really the one putting his heart out there on the line. Do you love me? Do you love me? There's nothing quite like hanging that question out there, is there? And waiting for a response. It seems like hours sometimes. I remember, I may have told you this story before, forgive me if that's the case, but Betsy and I had probably gone out maybe 7 times. And I went back to my hometown in Illinois for a couple-week vacation. And the night I returned, we went out and had dinner at Marie Callender's in Paradise Valley Mall. And probably, if it were still there, I remember the booth, the second one on the right. And we split a chicken Caesar salad. So that's the way it goes. And actually cornbread on the side. I remember that too. And I'd been thinking about her throughout my whole vacation for those whole 2 weeks. And that night, in a quiet moment, I said to her, I said, Betsy, I like you a lot. I like you a lot. And then I fumbled around, as we guys kind of do sometimes. And I think next thing I said, Betsy, you can correct me on this one, is who knows where this relationship could go? Who knows where this relationship could go? And you know, when you kind of hang your heart out there and you say something like that and you put yourself out on a limb, there was only one answer that I was really looking for. And any pause seemed like an eternity. Like, is she going to answer? And you feel so vulnerable about it. And I mean, the answer I wanted to hear was, Paul, I am absolutely captivated by you, by your charm, by your animal magnetism, by everything about you. And I will go where you go. I will live where you live as long as I can be with you. And that's not exactly what she said. Took me a few years to drag that one out of her. But here we are 28 years later, and lots to be thankful for. But that time before Peter, before the death and resurrection of Jesus, before that time, Peter was brimming with confidence one time, and he had assured Jesus, he said, if everyone else deserts you, I will never desert you. Remember that? He was so sure of himself at that time. And now this is a much more soft-spoken Peter who responds to Jesus, and his words back to him are, yes, Lord, you know I love you. You know I love you. There was no boasting on how good he was or what he accomplished. There was no comparisons to others, how his commitment was better than anyone else's. No. This is a much more humble and a much more vulnerable Peter. He discovers something that I hope all of us discover at one time in our life. I hope you already have discovered this, that all of us need to realize that we're not nearly as wise or as bulletproof as we once thought we were. We're not nearly as wise or as bulletproof as we once thought we were. Peter thought he would never deny Jesus. David never thought he would commit adultery. King David. We could go down the list. I never thought I would get sick. And you can add to the list. I never imagined that this would happen. I never thought I'd end up here in this place where I find myself. Peter is finally getting really honest. And Jesus asks him that question, do you love me 100%? And Peter responds back with a word, another word for love. It's not agape, it's another one. And he says, yes, Lord, you know I like you. But I'm feeling pretty unsure about us right now. I know our relationship needs work. That's kind of the gist of what he was saying. Maybe the greatest thing that is happening to you this morning is you're hearing Jesus in your mind, in your heart, say to you, do you love me? Do you love me? And your honest response back is the same as Peter's. Lord, you know my heart, and you know I think I do. I'm feeling kind of unsure about it, though. I want to be there, but I still feel attached to doing life the way I want to do my life. I know I need your help. He was there for Peter, and he's there for you, and he's there for me too. 3 times, if we read on, 3 times this exchange is repeated back and forth, and the third time Peter's wound is really smarting by now. Jesus, why do you keep asking this question? He doesn't seem to see this as the beginning of healing because it hurts so much to admit his weakness. All healing starts when we begin to admit our weakness. It was 3 times by a fire that Peter denied his Lord. And now 3 times Peter confesses his love for his Lord, who once again confirms, lest we ever doubt it, that he is amazingly forgiving. He wants us to see that we are weak by ourselves and that our real strength comes from relying on him 100%. Each time Peter says, I love you, Lord, as his response, Jesus gives him one simple instruction after every single time. He says it 3 different ways, though. He says, the first, he says, feed my lambs. Then he says, take care of my sheep. And then he says, feed my sheep. What's he saying? Jesus is telling Peter, Peter, I want you to tend this little flock, to love and to teach and to guard and to guide and to shepherd and to serve this little flock that means the absolute world to me. Jesus says to Peter, Peter, it's time to get back in the game. It's time to get back in the game. Feed my sheep, do my work, build my church. I think that Jesus is asking each of us the same question. And we probably have that same opportunity to respond. And we could be like the old Peter who said, sure, no problem, got it all under control. It's all about my strength. Or we could be the new Peter. Jesus, I love you, but I need your help every day. I need your help every single day. And Jesus says to Peter, and Jesus says to each and every single one of us who have failed him in some way, it's time to get over it. It's time to get over it. Life is too short to waste. Listen to Jesus. Let him guide you back. Get back into the game. Use the gifts that I've given you. Cherish the calling that I've given you. And this is about being a player in something much bigger than just yourself. Devote yourself to serving him through your local family. It really doesn't matter what you've done, Peter. It doesn't really matter what you've done. Us. Look at what Peter did. Kids have a great term for this. They call it a do-over. They call it a do-over. Wouldn't it be great if we could just offer do-overs just all the time like that? I mean, in a weak moment when I say something that I wish I wouldn't have said to Betsy, she would just say, Paul, you need a do-over right now. You need a do-over. Or your pastor is there on Sunday morning and he preaches and he teaches and he just lays a big egg on the pulpit on that Sunday. Bombs, the sermon just bombs, and the church family says, yes, just take a do-over. And by the way, when are the donuts coming back? That's the... All I can say is I'm grateful for another chance and another chance and another chance over the years. How about you? Are you grateful how God gives you another chance? To all who fail and want help, the church is the place for people who need another chance. It's not for place for people who do not need another chance and do not need grace. It's a place where God's people come to hear and experience his love. We admit our need and then receive as a free gift the incredible gift of forgiveness and a relationship with him. Actually, the whole account of the scriptures is about that exact transaction that takes place. Remember how God comes to Jonah and tells him he wants to go talk to some people, and Jonah runs the opposite way. And God is patient and gives him another chance. God comes to Saul, and actually Saul is murdering Christians at that time. He's setting them up to be killed. And he gives him a second chance. He changes his name from Saul to Paul, and the rest is history, of course. The whole New Testament, most of the New Testament is written by Paul. And God uses him to touch an amazing number of folks. Jesus asked Simon, who do people say that I am? And Simon says, I don't care what other people say, but you are the Messiah. You are the Son of God. Jesus says, way to go, Simon. From now on, you are Peter. You are Petros, the rock. And I'm going to use you in your confession to build up my community and to change the whole world. Yet Peter, the rock, he fails, doesn't he? He fails his Lord. And yet Jesus tells him, he says, feed my sheep. Get back into the game. You've got another chance. You've got another chance. God says that to me, and God says that to you. I know your failings. I know where you hurt, yet I could not love you anymore if that thing that you're thinking of in your mind had never happened. I specialize in giving another chance. I want you to tell the story of your wound and eventually your scar story so that others will know my love too. Jesus wants to use your life to give you something to live for to give all of us something to live for. That is the greatest thing in the world. And that's allowing the light of Jesus to come, absorb in us, and then reflect off to the rest of the world. That's the biggest, the greatest calling that there could possibly be, and each and every single one of us have that calling. Bow your head with me right now, if you would, please. Lord Jesus, I just sense that you're working right now I know you're working in my heart, and I know you're working in all of our hearts. And that encounter that you had with Peter around the charcoal fire is so powerful, and it tells us so much about who you are. And no matter what we've done, no matter where we've been, no matter how far we've strayed away, Jesus, you're telling us, get back in the game and use your gifts. Feed my sheep. I've gifted you. Jesus says, I've gifted each and every single one of us with amazing gifts. And each of us have a story to tell about how the amazing Jesus has changed our life. Send us out now to be your light in this world that so desperately needs the light of Jesus in every way. In his name we pray. Amen.